Start the recording. Okay, welcome to our September chapter meeting, our problem solvers panel. This is an event that is I'd say especially near and dear to WC's heart. We've done before, where we are here to try to answer your questions. We can't promise we'll be right about everything, but we will give it our best shot. Between the three of us, I did not calculate how many years of experience we have in the field. I will say WC is doing most of the heavy lifting on those years, but Jessica and I are solidly contributing as well. So thank you guys for being here. I will be monitoring the chat. I know you guys are on mute. Feel free to unmute and ask a question if you'd like, or use the hand up reaction or any other reaction you like in Zoom. I will say there's one that looks like applause, that's sort of like a little sideways hand that I sometimes mistake for a hand up. So if I call on you unexpectedly, that would be why. But otherwise, you're welcome to put questions or feedback in the chat. There you go. Yeah, John's got it. It's the clapping hands, but it looks like the raised hand to me. So going over our agenda, we just had our networking, and I was going to cover some job opportunities real quick that have been shared with us. And then we're going to go into our welcome and then some brief introductions from the three of us. So you'll know a little more about maybe what kind of questions to ask us. And then we're just going to go into the moderated Q&A. By moderated, I mean, we'll keep an eye on the questions that have been submitted already. We'll start with those. And then from there, feel free to toss something in the chat. I don't want to say there are no stupid questions, because it's such a cliche, but there are no questions that are too obvious that one of us has screwed up probably that exact thing before. Mostly speaking from personal experience, but feel free to ask us things, because we are happy to share with you our mistakes and lessons learned, so that you might, learn from the mistakes of others, which is honestly the best case scenario. So without further ado, just a couple of job opportunities to share. One of these is from Jack Malastani, looking for a data technical writer. It's a remote position or in an office in Miami. I did include that whole detail there. I will be sending out to everyone here the actual job description if that interests you. But it's one of those where, Jack's staffing company is filling that position, so you can send him your resume if you are interested. I know most of you are not currently looking for a job, or at least not at this exact moment, but probably the not too distant future for several. So that wanted to share that. Also, I know there's a job that came through STC for a technical writer 3 at Phoenix Defense. So that's looking for writing technical documents, business proposals, and you can apply on their website, and I'll be sending out the link to that as well. So just wanted to highlight a couple opportunities.
Great. Glad you did that.
Yeah, I want to do that every time. We really should.
Yeah, we should. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're here.
Yeah. So welcome from the Florida chapter. I know we've got a small group tonight, but I'm grateful for you all being here. And I think we're going to have a really good discussion. I think we always tend to have a good time just talking about TechCom and, sharing stories. So we're glad you're here to join us. And also, for anyone who's listening to the recording, that you're listening later. I just want to highlight what our next meeting is next month, October 21st at 6:30. We're having our panel presentation, which is lessons from new TechCom professionals. I don't have all of the names of those presenters yet, because I'm trying to firm some people up, but we have one of those people here. Julia bravely volunteered to share her experience transitioning from being a student to her first job. So
yay, Julia.
Yeah, Julia's definitely got a lot to speak to on the job hunting process and, the challenges of moving from your first job to your second. So I'm sure we'll have other perspectives as well. So Julia, I'm not putting you on the spot because I know you have a sore throat, but thank you for volunteering for that.
Anytime.
So we got tonight's panelists. That's WC, Jessica, and I. I realized WC and Jessica, I picked pictures for you from LinkedIn. So that is what you have. But we also have our lovely faces on video, so you can see us all in our, I was going to say natural habitats. I'm in some sort of unnatural blue abstract space. WC looks like he's in a nice place, and Jessica's representing the Florida chapter with our logo. But we're all excited to be here. And I was figuring we'd go around and give a little more introductory background. I think you've met all of us before, but a little detail on our professional, careers would probably help you out as we get into the questions. So speaker introduction. These are the things I broke out just for WC and Jessica in case you want something to refer to on what to share. You don't have to share all these things, but that's kind of where I'm starting, because otherwise, I will say I struggle with the question in interviews where they say, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I'm like, at what level? Do you want to know about my cats? No, that's not right. You probably want to hear about my professional credentials. So I guess in case there's anyone who doesn't know, I graduated from UCF in 2012 with my bachelor's in English with a technical communication concentration. And from there, went straight on to my master's in tech comm at UCF. I loved it so much, I didn't want to leave. And I felt I had more to learn. And I graduated in 2015 with that degree. And from there, I've, just been working since. I was trying to calculate my years of experience. I think I'm at 8 if I calculate it right, because I did work while getting my master's. And it's just a little bit shorter than the time I've been in STC since I joined as a student. So I currently work as a technical documentation specialist, a title that I don't know what it means. I think it came out of a grab bag of title words. I'm currently trying to work on an improved title at my job. It's one of my goals for the year. That's something that better reflects what I do and doesn't sound like everything and nothing. That's one of the fun things on the job, how most job titles, you're like, what does that mean? People are like, I don't know. It's something HR came up with. So that's it. Sagent, well, it was Sagent Lending Technologies, now Sagent, which is a financial technology company. I have the job I actually really love, but the more I describe it, the more boring it sounds. So I'll give you the short version, which is that I publish technical documentation for a loan servicing application. So it's software that on the consumer side you would never see. It's used by banks to service primarily mortgages. So it's a pretty specialized and extremely complex software. For our website, I publish at the moment for each release about 13,000 documents. It's a lot.
Wow. Wow.
Not all of them get updated with every release, but they all have to be published. So yeah, I work on the site architecture and a lot of work with Flare, which Jessica and I both talked about Flare since we've transitioned to that tool for publishing more of our documentation. So if you have tools questions, there are some specific tools I can answer. And I promise, John, I won't talk about Snagit the whole time and how much I love Snagit. He's heard about it already. Just a little bit about my STC roles. I'm currently Florida chapter president. Very happy to return. I was Florida chapter previously. President Felicia said I had to leave because I got elected to the STC board, and you cannot be a community officer at the same time you're on the board. So I did that for 2 years, and I'm happy to return. I am also currently co-chair of STC's education committee. So I work on planning the webinars, courses, and workshops that the society offers. So that's one of my other jobs I do on the side. And I started my very first official STC role in the chapter was with Dan Voss as a co-chair of our mentoring program, a job that I took on about 5 minutes after going to my first STC Florida meeting. And the first STC organization role I had was as the student outreach director on the community affairs committee, a role that John now holds. So I'm very glad to see, STC involvement at the chapter level and at the international level from our members. So that's my quick high level view. And I also have many cats, but I won't name them all for you. That's too much detail. So WC or Jessica, who wants to go next?
I'll tend to say ladies first.
Okay, if you're up for it, Jessica.
All right, I'm a lady. So I'll start with education. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, which I still can't believe, but I was trying to find out the meaning of life. It did prepare me. Every time I talk about it, I have to remember it did actually prepare me for technical communication in a way that, how do I phrase this? I don't get hung up on words, which I know we're in the word business, but I don't have a degree in a bachelor's degree in English. So I'm like, well, what's the point? I can say this in 10 different ways. What's the information? And I found that was a little bit jarring when I went back to graduate school in the English department. It was a rhetoric / technical professional writing degree. And I do think it helps me though, when I communicate, because I'm very, philosophy is much more about content than it is about wording, which is good and bad. But I think it helps me on the job, actually, that background, because I don't get as hung up on phrasing, even though you do have to. It's a very strange perspective, and I actually had a hard time breaking into technical communication because they wanted an English degree, and I didn't have it, even though I could demonstrate I could demonstrate my proficiency with writing, and clearly when I spoke, I obviously understood the English language. But so I did go back to school. Oh, I'll tell the story I told in my spotlight. I had no idea. We mentioned earlier when we were in our networking session, I had no idea what to do when I graduated on college with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Someone asked, I think there's a question coming about how do you wow people in an interview? Not by saying or answering any questions about your philosophy degree. I can tell you that. You'll have to be asked the question. So why did you do that? Or what was that all about? And there's no good answer. You think you get stumped on tell me about yourself. Why did you major in philosophy? We'll stump you no matter what. There's no way to look good answering that question. So I did take a test at an adult education class. And I do remember it was a skills assessment. It was very involved. And it was model, translator, or technical writer. Now, how funny is that? I love that you could take a skills test to be a model. So anyway.
A non-judgmental test in a way, right?
Yes, exactly. And, I did speak French, but I lost a lot of it. So I just decided to research technical writing. And I actually started as a technical recruiter, which also helped me very much talking. When I got on the job, I had trouble breaking in, but then I went back to graduate school in UNC Charlotte for the Tech Com program. I did not go all the way for the master's. They had it. You could stop at a graduate certificate, which was a trend at the time. I decided to stop at the certificate level because I was already working. I did obtained a position through an internship. And I just, for anyone who's attended any of my CPTC training, or not training, the workshops knows I just had trouble understanding how learning about, I don't know, some of the stuff in the high level graduate English classes, it just has no bearing on your job. And I was busy trying to figure out the software development lifecycle, how developers spoke, what programming was like. And I just said, I need other skills and I need my brain power left over to really do well at this job. So I'm almost going to hit, I think, the 20-year mark. I'm either at 20 years or just under it. I have a hard time because it was all one long progression of working in IT. And then
Right.
cool. So I'm currently working at a company called CSI Perseus, but I've been with the same product group for about 7 or 8 years. We were recently purchased. So it's the same team, the same product. I do not publish 13,000 documents.
It's too many.
My product team is in the automotive industry. It's very much a retail application. So my audience is anyone who needs to use it to basically, if you've ever had service in an automotive shop, that's anything when they're typing on the computer, we make the software that they're typing into, and any document is printed will come out of our software. So I have to document that for everyone. Current and past STC roles. When I was in graduate school, I definitely was involved with the board. And I was involved more as an active member. And then I sort of left for a while and came back. And I seem to, I think I mentioned I was so impressed with the Orlando chapter, which is now the Florida chapter. I've been through the over the hill and through the woods chapters where they were folding into the state chapter. And so I'm very happy to be back. And I stepped up to run for vice president, which is, I'm learning a lot and it's been a great experience.
Thanks, Jessica. All right, WC.
Let me start by saying if this is longer than it should be, I apologize in advance. But for those of you for those of you who are working in the field of technical communication, I've invented it. My degree is in chemistry at Iowa State University with minors in English and journalism. And so in 1972, I was hired by then Martin Marietta to become an associate writer editor. And so I cut my teeth basically editing Bill Standard 847 reports. Over time, that grows into doing small proposals. And over time, that the amount of proposal responsibility grows. I was very unhappy after about 5 years in. And I actually was planning to go back to school and become an optometrist. And I visited University of Houston, Southern College, Ohio State. I was really serious about doing this because I hated what I was doing so much. And then they pushed me into supervision. Why did they do that? Because the older people didn't want to. They didn't want to have to deal with the engineers and the deadlines and the scheduling. And so at least it gave me a certain amount of control, a little bit of latitude and flexibility over how I approached the work, and certainly how I scheduled it. I didn't have people telling me when to work. I was working when the work needed to be done. And that didn't make me a perfect supervisor yet, but it's part of the growing pains. Over time, as with Dan Voss, we became recognized as having capability for doing system level defense proposals. These could have as many as 100 engineers contributing their specialty, and non-cooperatively, may I say. So that somehow the responsibility to publish in about 4 cycles, a couple drafts, including for a major review draft or 2, and then a final deadline of maybe 10 different volumes with specialized content. And in all cases, without having the authority to compel somebody to do anything, getting everything pulled together and into the print shop on time to actually deliver the darn thing. After that, somewhere along the line, I mean, no one can do this and survive for a great period of time. Dan probably did longer than anybody that I recognized. I put 30 years basically in that mill. After that, and it was about the time that the presentations and communications department merged with public affairs, our enlightened fathers, by now Lockheed Martin, recognized that these people write and these people write. Why aren't they in the same department? Which meant that respect for what I will say is the technical communication aspects, and certainly the competitive business positioning of our jobs, kind of got ignored and lost, because we were more concerned with, let's write a good press release. If you could write a press release and get comment from corporate, that clearly was worth more than winning a $100 million proposal. I did not understand it, but it forced my job to change. And I became a communications manager, but also had the good fortune to have a built-in escape. Whereas the rest of my department was functioning as a department, I was jettisoned off to a multinational joint venture company. And as its senior communicator, again, I could continue to have the flexibility to do things as I chose to do, but it suddenly had more to do with marketing and also competitive positioning against Raytheon. So from starting as a blue pencil editor, back in the days when we had blue pencils, I ended up being recognized as our best opinion editorial writer. There's some stories that go behind that. Ask later if we get slowed down. But then I retired in, 2016, and have been retired for a good 4 years. And they have been a good 4 years. So in terms of my roles in STC, I've held almost all of them at the chapter level, was president in 2001, 2002, and used that as a springboard to become treasurer for the society in 2005. I spent 4 years at that, and then I was positioned to be the vice president, and managed to lose that. And frankly, I'm kind of thankful that I did. But then came back 2 years later because I really had work in my mind that was unfinished, and served on the board of directors for 2 years. And since that time, I'm content to be your humble treasurer.
All right. Thanks, WC. Yeah, we are some proud candidates who lost for STC board positions in the past. If that's ever something you want, don't be deterred. A lot of wonderful people have lost elections and then gone on to serve in different roles or, to try again. So in case you want to see your future in STC beyond the chapter, there'll be a lot of people here to support you. So I think we're going to get on to questions or problems. The very first one we received ahead was referenced by Jessica earlier. What's a good way to make a good impression during an interview? I have a story, but Jessica or WC, if you've got someone you're ready with.
Let me say that if you look back on it, I really haven't had a significant interview in 50 years. I may not be the guy that you want to ask that.
Just in case, or from the interviewing side, that would be as well. So I guess I'll go ahead with.
I have a funny story, but but I can follow up with after you.
Okay. Yeah, I can tell the story of how I got the job I have now, which at the time, I don't want to say I was unqualified, but it was a little bit of a stretch from the role I'd had because what I do now is publishing documentation and a bit of like web development work. And my previous role was very traditional online help software writing. So really a writing and editing job to something that was more focused on process management. But I was really excited for the job. And it was one of those where you go through many series of interviews. You have a screening call with a recruiter, then you interview sometimes with someone adjacent to the position, and then you interview with the hiring manager, and then you interview with the team. I think there were a few reasons I got the job. I think because I did do a good job of selling my skills and showing that I had what it took to do the job and would learn quickly. But one of the reasons I got put through from the interview with someone who wasn't in the department, but at the time the company I was interviewing with, Fiserv, always had someone from like a related organization or part of the organization. So someone who partnered with documentation do an interview as well. And that was with the manager of the training department, who I still work with to this day and is a very nice person. And she wasn't really interested in whether or not I could do that much with publication. She just wanted to know if I was good at solving problems, which is great for this panel because she came in was like, okay, great. I saw something about SharePoint on your resume that stood out to me. So I wanted to, interview you. I've got a SharePoint problem with my team. And if I explain it to you, do you think you'd be able to help me solve it? I was like, this is not what I expected. I had prepared a long explanation about my knowledge of the software development lifecycle and how that relates to publishing documentation. So instead, I sat with her because it was in a physical room and wrote down what she said and then sketched some things out to help her fix some structural problems with her SharePoint site and how she'd set up the permissions because she was having issues where people couldn't access documents they needed to. And that's because they, not to get too SharePointy, broken the inheritance for permission, so things were all jumbled up and everything. And I was able to help her fix that problem. I had put SharePoint on my resume because it's something I had learned, and I did feel pretty comfortable that I could work things out, but I did not expect to be put on the spot with a real world problem that even later, after she said, great interview, I'm going to recommend you. I think you were good. I honestly don't. Yeah, I think you'll probably be good at the job, but I'm just glad you know how to fix things because there's always things to be fixed in every department. And after I got hired, I ran to her in the hall and she's like, yeah, thank you. It worked. So thank goodness it wasn't just you making something up to sound good in the interview. And that was part of the reason that I made it through that round. Of course, I did have to do other interviews to demonstrate it. So I don't want it to sound like that was the one magical thing. But being ready just to respond to what people are actually asking. And my nature is to prepare. And if I had just gone ahead and said to her the things I'd prepared, I don't think she would have been very impressed because it would not have been relevant to her as a manager. So that's one of my things is just being really responsive and accepting that sometimes people do put you on the spot. Yeah, John says the pop quiz interview. So that's my story. Jessica, you had a funny story?
I do, and it dovetails very well with yours. And
almost like I planned it.
Yeah, it is almost like I planned it. How I obtained my current job, long story, but my manager, like I sat down and said, hello. I had all my writing samples, and they had a printed book that, I should have, where's my ruler? I think it's 2.5 inches. It's huge and it's this wide, it's this wide and this thick. And he just threw it down right in front of me and said, there, what do you think? And it was a very interesting interview. But I did have the right response, which is dovetails with what you have to read the room and you have to respond to what's being said. And I must have said the perfect thing. I just looked at that and said, that doesn't scare me. Because it didn't, I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to intimidate me. And I don't think on purpose, it's just that they had 2 people not work out. Mm-hmm. And at that point, he was probably out of patience and was like, look, can you handle it or can you not? And then I did open it and I was like, wow, there's no headings. I kind of made some comments And that's my favorite interview story because it's just so funny. And it was such a loud book and it was so heavy and so big. I just was trying not to look too shocked. Like, do you actually publish, you actually use this? But it does highlight something. I did post in the chat, the STAR method. And I got up earlier. I don't know if anybody can see it with my lighting. You probably can't see it.
We can just see it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
wrote this down because actually when I was, and I literally have it on my board behind my monitor, because when I was trying to help my mentee Nancy to get a job, we were talking about something and she said, oh yeah, I talked to Alex and he mentioned the STAR method, so I'm good. And I was like, what's the STAR method? And then I looked it up and thought, that's fantastic. I wish I'd known that years ago, because one of the ways to impress in a job interview is sort of like what you said as well, Bethany, is to talk about your experience, even if it's school experience. And the way you talk about it shows them that you actually understand the landscape. You understand, even if it's a school project, it's a web project. So you have to think about the web. And as you're describing your experience, you're letting them know how you think. And I think that if you answer that well enough and you stick to your, past projects, things that you've done, it can be I think it can come across as impressive. I was able to do that in that interview, and just the fact that I wasn't intimidated and I didn't think it was a big deal, because it wasn't at that point, was impressive. But also I wished I had this methodology, because if you know that that's what you want to do, it's almost like you're focusing on your wheelhouse. That's my strength. I know what I've done. I know what I thought at the time. It's part of also, a lot of us here have been through tech comm programs. And that's one of the things you do learn, is how to think about the work. You have to write a paper about why you did this, why you set up the project that way. And you really have to think about it. And so if you can speak about it that way in an interview without going over, you can really, I think that can be impressive. I didn't know about the STAR methodology, and I thought, wow, I've talked way too much about certain projects that I really could have cut myself off if I had prepared a few and used that, what is it, situation, task, action, and result. Think of a few examples, describe the situation, what you had to do, the action you took, and the outcome. And if you can do that in a way that, I think it depends on who you're interviewing with, but like if you're interviewing with a developer, you would skew that experience to understanding the software development lifecycle and understanding what developers go through. And as you talk about it, they know what kind of person you are. And I think that really, it also is a comfort level, because you're not having to say, so tell me about yourself. You're like, well, when I was on this project, it gives you something you can really feel solid in, which can help with the nerves, I found too.
Yeah, I actually want to highlight something you said, and kind of just an observation that I think dovetails what WC was saying earlier about his career, and what we have to offer as technical communicators, regardless of our role, is that I think we're very intentional about our work. Not that we always get to do things exactly the way we want to, but in a lot of other roles, and you see when you work in technology, a lot of people don't think about how they do the work. They just do the work. And not that we always get to do the work in an ideal way, but I think generally as a profession, we're very thoughtful and conscientious about how we approach things. And that's why we're really good at working with other teams, because we think about how they do the work as well. And I don't know that that's a skill. It's an incredibly valuable skill that I think is easy to overlook, because when you do it well, it goes unnoticed because you're just getting along with everyone and everyone's working well together, and they don't know exactly why, because they're not really thinking about how the work is done, just the work itself. At least that's something I think. I was curious, WC, if that kind of fits with some of your observations from your time.
Are we off interviewing now?
Yeah. It's an adjacent. I think it's a good question. So,
well, and particularly as I try and start from going to various STC summits, and if you look at the way we look, for most people attending the summit, blue jeans, t-shirts, very limited self-awareness. And yet in the workplace, particularly for the lone authors and writers, you see a lot of, stuck in the corner, a lot of a lack of interaction, a lot of frustration. And I got to tell you, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that guy. I mean, our habit at Lockheed Martin, Martin Marietta, was, because we had a government customer, believe this or not, we wore coat and tie every day. So when it came to like the STC summit that was in Orlando, I was in coat and tie. And Bill Stolgaitis, who is the executive director of STC, is the one that suggested to me that I ought to run for an office and get more involved with STC in a leadership role. Would that have happened if I hadn't been wearing the suit? If that would that have happened if I hadn't been handing out candy to people in Cincinnati, encouraging them to come to Orlando the next year? Any number of reasons for that. But that left an indelible mark on me first about how we represent ourselves. If you want to be the t-shirt guy in the corner, if you want to grumble about the air conditioning and the late inputs and you don't get any cooperation and you make it about you, forget it. You're going to enjoy that feeling for the rest of your career. This is obviously past recruiting, but I kind of started preaching what I call is the public utility approach to communications. And that is, when you plug something in, you don't negotiate with the electric socket. When you go and turn on the water faucet, you don't negotiate with it. You just expect water. And certainly when our customers come to us, they're not looking for a lot of conditions and ifs and other restrictions on how they work with us. They came in believing that we could make something better that they need to have done. So very much through my approach throughout my career was, I can't complain. Now, this gets hard to do when suddenly you don't get engineering inputs for a proposal until 8 o'clock at night, and people expect you to have it in the morning. That becomes a little, you've got to be responsible and realistic about what you can actually do. And frankly, that means you got to be honest. But whining, I had one guy even had buttons at wore at that saying, no whining. And if you can basically adopt that attitude of being there to serve your customer, and what evolved from that is a belief that, frankly, my job was not about developing presentations or producing proposals. My job was to make people around me successful. And I really hadn't expressed it to myself in that way until probably about 40 years of career, to tell you the truth. But in recognizing that when you make your director have a good day, you have a good day. But more importantly, he remembers that he had a good day and that you were involved with it. And I was fortunate in my career to be in those kinds of positions where you cut down the static, you do the job, you help the team succeed. And if you do that, you're going to have a very, very long and pleasant career. And they might even pay you for it.
If you're very, very lucky, they pay you well.
And to pick up on that, I just want to say, it's sort of wrapping up what I was saying. I thought, and if you can demonstrate that you have that attitude in the way you describe your experience, that will come across in an interview. That because sometimes you'll be asked, like, how did you deal with a difficult person? And you can say something like, well, I remember I was on this project and I realized, he was just stressed out. He was a perfectionist. He couldn't let it go. But our whole goal was to get out the door. And you're sort of describing it that way. And that tells them what your attitude is. So I think that's a great point. Your attitude about the work will come through in how you talk about it. So I think that's a great way to get across what you're trying to say, WC, which is, I would be great to work with. Don't you want to work with me? I'm a great team member. People like me. You'll like working with me. And it comes across in how you talk about your past experiences, I think.
Yeah. And if you're a student or new to the profession, don't feel like you have to only share experiences that are at the workplace. You're not starting with zero work you've done in STC or, what group projects, especially I know in some of the later courses at UCF where you do a lot of hands-on work with like actual clients, that's all very important to talk about. Make sure you know all of that. The details are helpful when telling the story. To Jessica's point, being a good storyteller helps. Not that you have to regale them with the epic story of your brochure at every job interview, but it's great because it also lets you segue into highlighting work you've done, So it's nice to, like I said, be responsive. I'm sorry, I say two things. Be responsive to what's happening in the moment, but also do be prepared. And I second Jessica's advice about the STAR method, which also was recommended to me by Alex back when I was graduating. So it's the gift that keeps on giving for the advice from Alex. So I didn't see any other questions in the chat yet. So I think I'll shift to our other question, which is bouncing off of our early networking. We were talking a bit about the exciting financial prospects of becoming an adult and then one day becoming a retiree. The glamorous world of why do we work for the money? And we had, I think, sort of an observation, which is a bit of a question, which was from Caitlin in her finance class. She said, we're literally only talking about the shift from pensions to 401k. At this point, both those terms have started to lose meaning. And I would say that's especially true when you have had neither or the opportunity to engage with neither of them. They are mythical buckets of money. There's an article that I read before that breaks down what the difference is between a pension plan and a 401k. I was going to put WC on the spot if you're okay with that, WC, to explain.
Sure. Be happy to do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It turns out that pensions were actually introduced after World War II as an inducement by the aerospace industry to have people, particularly people with technical skills, come to work for them. And I wasn't really aware of that until many, many years in. But because then in a competitive landscape, you kind of had to have one if you're going to compete for labor with the aerospace industry at least the engineering level. The main difference between the two is with a pension, your saving for retirement is done for you. You don't do anything. It's just kind of an automatic addition to your salary that you don't get to see until you leave the company. There was usually a thing called vesting, which means they didn't give you any part of your pension. You didn't earn your pension until you'd been there for at least 5, possibly 10 years. And then the account in your name would continue to grow, and it was yours when you retired. In the late 200s, I think, well, about the time that I retired, only 20% of companies in America continued to offer, well, employers in America continued to offer pensions, generally education, generally some form of government service, or working in government. But because the American landscape had shifted from large businesses creating new jobs to small business could not afford to do that. Somewhere along the line, maybe about 25 years ago, somebody had a scheme that was called the 401k. It's like, that's the paragraph in the tax code that discovers tax treatment of what has become an individual retirement plan. And the intention was that the burden for saving now becomes yours, and the company will match you to some small degree in a profit sharing sense if you actually commit yourself to saving something. So in many cases, like if you save 2% of your salary, which means you got to physically each check, make sure that that gets taken away before you have a chance to spend it. The company then would usually say that, well, I'll add 1% of your salary value to that. So at the end of the year, you have 3. And the more you put in, the more the company matches up to a limit. But here's the problem. The problem is that to be able to retire at the lifestyle that you had achieved while working, you have to retire with 12 times your annual salary. That's not the salary you're making now. That's the salary you're gonna make. So if you think about that in terms of crazy terms, it says that you need to have something like 3 times your annual salary saved by the time you're 40, 7 by the time you're 50. There was a wonderful Money Magazine article about that. But the hard part is you are not responsible for meeting that goal. I had the luxury of, I could screw up. I could completely ignore retiring. And because of the nature of my work and the longevity of my work, it's like not everybody has the opportunity to work past 65. Not everybody has the opportunity to be with a single company for 45 years. But if you did, it's easier than skipping around and not having a job from time to time, and also having the burden of sharing, of saving all that time for yourself, plus raising a family, plus life experience. So let me stop at that point. Did that help? Was that enough, or should there be more?
Or do you have follow-up questions? We'll give a minute in case Caitlin wants to respond in the chat. That all makes sense. You did a good job. I
Okay.
think you explained it really well, WC. I'll say I had the benefit of a dad who explained all this to me when I was first starting out, after graduating, where he's like, the salary you get is not the only benefit you need to take into account when you're looking for a job. And you'll see on a lot of job postings that they'll even include some note about 401k match or something like that when you're looking at jobs. And it's good to ask what that means, because it can vary wildly. When I first started at Wyndham, they did full match up to 6%, which was a really good match, but it was only vested if you stayed for a year at least. So if you left the company, all the money you didn't get any of their match. You still kept your own money, but you didn't get any of that, additional money that you're sort of counting on as part of your salary. So I don't want to be doom and gloom about like, all right, you got to start saving for retirement now, feel stressed. But in a way you do. And my apologies for previous generations. It's only getting harder to save for retirement, especially if you want to say own a home and that sort of thing. It's good to give up some of your money now and make wise investments, even if you lose some money. I will say in our last, major stock market hit earlier at the beginning of the pandemic, I think a lot of people lost a lot of money. It was very alarming to see that. And your retirement account is usually, you have a lot of things that are investments. So when the stock market tanks, you might lose 20% of the money you saved. But if you're planning ahead long enough, you have the years that the market will recover, you'll make that money back. So if you start at 40 or 50, you don't have the time for economic downturns that you do when you're 22, if you get a good job right out of college.
I do have something to add to that,
Sure.
which you kind of touched on, and that is it's a problem that begins immediately. As soon as you start your first job, your first salary, you have to start then. Every dollar you save in your 20s is worth 3 of every dollar you'll save for the rest of your career, because of the nature of compounding and growth. It's when you can least afford it that it's most valuable that you can do it. Right. So don't pay your student loan, pay yourself, right?
But actually that is challenging advice, right? When to pay back your student loans if you have them.
It's an impossibility for you who are students now. I don't think it can be done, but to the degree that you can, you have to put your priority there if you actually intend to retire someday and don't want to live in a box.
Well, that's I'd say the differentiator between the pension and the 401k is 401k is subject to the whims of the market, whereas pensions were a lot more solid.
No.
You can invest your pension, but you always had your company backing you up without it coming out of your paycheck. A 401k is kind of a double hit where it comes out of your paycheck and then the market might tank. So it's a big challenge. And if I'm going to give any advice to the younger generation, please do not be so lackadaisical about them taking away Social Security. It very much annoys me when people just say, well, it won't be there when I'm going to retire. I'm like, well, that's because you're young and you don't understand how life works yet. I will be the person outside with the torch yelling about not taking away my Social Security. That is something, it is not an entitlement. You pay into it. It comes out of your paycheck every
you see it. If you get an actual statement for your paycheck, they'll tell you how much money they're taking from you.
You pay Social Security and you pay Medicare out of your paycheck. It's part of what you have invested into it. It is something you have earned. It's not a handout. And so I do say when I've talked to some of the younger folks on the job, and I think, please don't have that attitude.
It does matter.
I understand that it's just greed that they want to dip into Social Security. They want to make it subject to the market, but we've already seen how 401ks are not as stable. Security is the operative word. And I don't know. I'm on my soapbox, but I just think this is something that I will fight for because we've earned it, and it's sort of scary to watch these policies change over time. So anyway, I was just gonna say that's part of it, but if I can give you any advice, it's be ready with a pitchfork and a torch. Hopefully it'll never come to that, but I just think when you're in your 20s, sometimes you don't realize how important these things are. And my big hope is that they lower the Medicare eligibility age, and then I can maybe contract a little more.
Yeah. Or marry rich if that's an
There's
option for you.
For those of us who don't have that option, right?
I love my husband dearly, but I did not marry him for his money.
Well, that's another thing too. If you're starting a career, I mean, I think I'm well past marrying age. I don't know, but I'm pretty much
Marrying age.
well. I'm in my late 40s and hasn't happened yet. So I've always planned to. I know that I've got to manage that on my own. So it's a different kind of planning.
Oh, yeah, it would be.
So
as I do joke, I'm probably going to die at my desk. It's painful to think about, but maybe I'll be doing something fun. But
any follow-up questions? I know that the financial turn was not directly tech-com.
Serious doom. Sorry.
Okay, we'll talk about how the planet, is inevitably going to be flooded and on fire and everything by the time they retire. We won't go down that dark road.
The apocalypse will happen before you have to worry about retirement.
But John says this is fine. No, we're happy to talk about any other questions. I think we had sort of a general topic we discussed in the networking that I can bring up next. If there's no other questions in the chat, or if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question, you are welcome to, because we have talked about money a lot, but we are happy to talk about TechCom. We're happy to talk about school stuff, by the way. If that's stuff you have questions about as well, we've been there in various different degrees, anything like that you would like to ask.
I have to admit, when we did this panel the first time, I really was expecting, questions about working with other people, like how do I shoot my boss and get away with it, and other things. Of course, my viewpoint had always been from a departmental, somewhat competitive kind of a role, where I had any number of let's say directors' wives, other people's girlfriends, this kind of thing, added to my work group, or somehow put at a parallel level. And then the promotion came and I didn't get it. They were gone. I mean, I had so many people come around me like a shot. So I kind of had to learn to deal with that it really wasn't about me. I didn't lose anything in that moment. And I really tried to be happy for other people and their success. But, it's like those kinds of things, I suspect, don't weigh on you as much because you're working more individually. The promotion isn't there to achieve, which is a shame. So how you earn stripes, how you demonstrate your time and grade that earns you more money and more respect, or at least stops people from asking the stupid questions like you just fell off the boat, really does matter. Those questions didn't come in last year, and I doubt they're going to come in this year. We ended up focusing more on tools and technical, the technology of networking and this kind of thing. But I think we're probably positioned to talk to either kind at this point. So.
Yeah, I know we're putting you guys on the spot. What are your questions? If you've got anything, if you don't have questions, that's okay. We will continue to talk because we have plenty of problems to share at this point. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on that, but go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I did mention to Bethany, I volunteered to be the Flare tool person. And if anyone is interested, I did achieve my certification in Flare. I didn't know. I like I said, I'm not trying to be the certification maven. It was just in 2019, I had a goal to get 2 certifications, and I did get one of them. So if anyone wants, I could talk about that. You don't have to. We don't have to, but I just thought that would be something if anyone was curious about.
Yeah, feel free to guys to pipe up in the chat.
Let me freelance a bit then. One of the things that you will run into during your career are called ethical dilemmas.
Oh.
And,
I'm sorry, we just read about that in the CPTC book. I'm sorry, there was a whole chapter.
There you go.
That was there. It was
Dan Voss basically wrote the book on that, as far as that goes, and is much, actually has done programs on it. My turn came as a fairly young supervisor. It was in the mid 80s. I had been with Martin Marietta for, I guess 13 years at the time. And we were doing a significant new business proposal, which actually related to autonomous weapon systems. Now we don't think about missiles with brains that just kind of loiter and then can get brought in on a target. But this in its infancy, we were doing a program, competing for a program to do that. The director, the proposal director, was a fairly smug fellow, very, very self-important. As usual with any proposal kind of thing, I didn't have enough people to do all the jobs. There was more work that could be done, yet I was still responsible to keep everybody happy. And he wanted to work with one of my younger, more attractive editors on the executive summary. I was going to do the executive summary, but I also didn't have time to sit with him. So I thought, well, it's part of my relationship. That's the other thing. Relationship science is very important. There are relationships you need. There are relationships you don't need. So the ones you need to have for yourself, you make sure you keep. You don't let other people build them to your detriment. But in this case, the young editor was basically there to help find information that we needed for the executive summary, not the final responsibility of crafting it into the overwhelmingly persuasive argument that it needed to become. About 3 days down the road, she came to me with a horror-struck look on her face because she had been sexually harassed by the director. And this is in the middle of a proposal that has got to go in another 20 days or so. Lockheed, or Martin Marietta, had at that point openly expressed a new policy against sexual harassment in any form that wouldn't be tolerated. So here I am in the middle of an overtime, understaffed situation with a scared young lady, and I've got to decide whether I'm going to report it, because I also know that my relationship with the proposal director is directly in the balance here. So I reported to my supervisor, who was the communications manager, and we agreed to take it forward to HR, fully expecting that he and I would not have jobs anymore. The good news is they fired him. I never would have guessed that ever possibly could have been an outcome. But be aware, it may be as simple as, ignoring legal warnings that in a manual for a lawnmower that happens to break under certain circumstances and fling blades and cuts legs off, that you will be called upon during your career to answer the bell, to do the right thing, and to some degree measure the cost and have to accept it, because if we're not able to communicate product safety or protect our people, then there really isn't much point in doing what we're doing.
Thank you for sharing, WC. I don't think I've heard that story from you before, so
it's not often told.
Yeah.
Her name was Debbie Blair. It's like once this happens to you, you don't forget it, and the look in the eyes. It was something real.
And I will say harassment in the workplace has not completely vanished since the 80s. I'd say companies have a lot more policies. I'm glad to hear your HR responded promptly and positively, but that's not always the case. So, something to be aware of. HR is there to protect the company.
God, I expected 3 days off without pay, and then his continuing animosity while we were trying to get a proposal out for him.
Yeah,
that would have made it really rough no matter what.
I will say I've been very lucky that I've had very few ethical quandaries in my job. I've had things where I've had to say no when asked to. Just want to clarify things like, cutting corners, or maybe not being entirely honest about things, or, representing something a little differently. There's a lot of these things that seem like gray areas. I think especially it's one of STC's ethical principles, to have honesty and integrity. And my stance has always been, if they need you to lie or, risk health harm, or in my case, it'd be, some sort of financial impact to the client, to get the company ahead, that's not a company you want to work for. So not that, just leaving is the option, but, sometimes the system doesn't come through for you correctly. And there are other jobs out there. So I know it's hard when you feel like your job is on the line, if this does come up for you. it's better to do the right thing because you have to live with the choices you've made. The company doesn't care in the same way. So.
And you do need to, and by the way, this is chapter 4 in the technical communication.
There you go. Shout out for the certified study buddies group.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
But and one of the things in that scenario, just to follow up on what you said, Bethany, if you find yourself in a situation like that, you just need to document everything or get someone to send you an email that says, yes, we want you to do this.
Mhm.
And that's it's not that you're covering, it's just that you're explaining you were put in an impossible situation and it wasn't something you imagined. It really is what happened.
And even I guess
I just thought of a good
go
example.
ahead.
I used to have this when I was documenting hardware, that it's usually I haven't had anything well, I'll tell this story. I was documenting hardware and we had a salesperson. It's one of those guys, like he wanted to sell that they were on the cutting edge, and I had to do the specs on the back of the sales material, and I would do the research and find out that radio or whatever it was he wanted hadn't even been released yet. It only existed in a lab in Hong Kong. Or I would go over to engineering and they would just look at me like, are you kidding me? No, we can't even order that part yet. And so I would have to say, no, I can't put that in the spec. I mean, and I tried to make the argument, like, if I do that, everyone will know we're lying. Like if I could look it up, this was years ago. So, the internet was somewhat mature, but not as much as it is now. So information did travel a little bit slower. And I remember that was sort of my way of dealing with it, to say, look, we can't look like we're making it up. If I could find it out in 5 minutes, so can our competition. And then we look like a laughing stock. Why would we want to, trying to make the business argument? It's an ethical dilemma, but also, okay, if ethics doesn't sway you, how about just practicality and a reputation of anyone believing what you try to sell in the future? And maybe, using the lowest common denominator to do the right thing. But
yeah,
it was a way to handle it.
Well, I'm glad. It sounds like you handled it really well, because ultimately, you're trying to make the best decision you can, even if other people think, let's just do it the easy way. And sometimes, right, it's not sexual harassment, it's something egregious. It's just someone saying, this is more expedient, so we want to do that, or it makes us look better.
Yeah, I would say you do. Oh, go ahead, Beth. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead, and then I'll pull something from the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the ethical dilemmas, I don't know if I'd qualify them as ethical dilemmas, but working with a difficult person, and I've definitely been in the room with people where someone just said something to me and basically said something like, oh, you don't want to do that because you're lazy. And then would kind of make it a joke. And I was like, that's not funny, and sort of being in the room, and you have to read the room and say, okay, everybody thought that was fine. That was not fine. And you're noticing passive aggressive behavior that I find very hard to deal with because it's not overt, but it's definitely there. And one of the things that I've learned over my career, and this might be good advice to anybody out there, is sometimes when there's a person like that on the team and you have a problem with them, the one thing I've learned is if I have a problem like that, usually other people do too. And eventually in that scenario, somehow I did have to have the conversation, like, okay, we all know everybody's got an issue with this person or that person, or, that there's conduct in certain meetings that you just can't, that isn't acceptable. And so it's always good. It's hard to toe the line between gossip. You don't want to gossip, but you do need to find out if you're being gaslighted or it's not in your head. This does actually happen, and other people do recognize the behavior and are dealing with it in their own way. That's where I found the ethical issues are too, is I'm trying to figure out how to manage this.
And I'll say there's something about company culture that comes up. And when you're new to the profession, some people are really lucky and they go to a company that has a really positive, supportive culture, especially for new people or new grads. And other times, not so much. Or there might be, positives and negatives, and you decide what you want to live with, what's not appropriate, what you're going to call out. And some of that you just learn as you go. And like you said, sometimes you're like, am I alone in this? And finding allies is really important. I'll say for me, especially when I first graduated as a young woman, I was not I was not overtly sexually harassed, but I was put in positions because I was a young woman where they're like, well, you do documentation, so surely we could put you in this meeting as a note taker. It's like, well, I'm getting a master's degree right now. I'm a technical writer. I have a lot more skills. I can take notes, but that's not what I'm qualified to do. But I agreed to do it and did it probably for a year. And sometimes I regret doing that. Other times I thought it got me in meetings I wouldn't have been in, with higher level people that helped me in other ways. So sometimes there's not like a right answer or a wrong answer. You're kind of navigating what's going to work for you, and you make mistakes, and try to decide what's the line on, people taking advantage of you or exploiting a position you're in, because that's going to happen at some point. And some of it's just normal workplace stuff, and some of it's, over and beyond. I will say, Caitlin put a comment about when if your company was turning against you, but the holding ethics, when they protect you with whistleblower act stuff. WC's point was that law came later. There's also a lot of things that if you've seen people go public against their companies, many times, if they go forth alone, the consequences are dire. I don't know, for anyone who's into gaming, if you've been following the Activision Blizzard whole thing. They had years and years of severe sexual harassment of female employees that was brought up over and over again publicly by many, many women who were then blackballed in the industry. And that went on for an extended period of time, to the point where they got investigated by the state. A lot of their executives had to resign. They said, well, we're going to try to do better. Now they're being investigated by the SEC because they hid stuff about all the sexual harassment lawsuits from their shareholders. But for years, there was no support for women who did come forward, even though they did everything right, documented it, went to their supervisors, went to HR, had everything, and it tanked their careers for a very long time. And it was not like one woman; it was like, dozens over the course of that whole company. It is a very interesting news story, very upsetting. I don't know if I exactly recommend reading it, but it kind of highlights, I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you really like the company you work with, it's very unlikely that they will look after you more than they will look after the company. So I'm glad in WC's case, the company did the right thing. I've been lucky my company, in any case, have always done the right thing, but sometimes they don't. So having personal integrity is really important.
And also, one of the things, just thinking on all these situations, is to realize that at the time it can feel personal, but it's not. And that's where I think I've always found solace in just reaching out to other people, trying to toe the line about not gossiping, but just to check yourself, because if someone is being problematic like that, you're not the only one. There's, there's usually, like you said, especially when it comes to harassment issues, there's never just one. And it usually has very little to do with you. And getting that right in your head as quickly as you possibly can is one of the keys, I think, to dealing with the ethical challenge, because I think it can feel so personal that you're not responding in the most objective way that you can, because you're so worried, what did I do? For me, that was just when people were being difficult to me and not, trying to put me down in meetings and stuff like that. And it really had nothing to do with me. It had to do with someone angling for a position, and I could have been anyone, and I wish I'd learned that much younger, because I think I can now, when I encounter that same thing, I go, he's probably like that with everybody, or she's probably like that with everybody. And, if anybody making this call would be in my position, it really doesn't have much to do with what I'm saying or not saying. And I think that's a key to dealing with some of these dilemmas, is because you wind up being in them so long because you're thinking it's you, or there's something to do with you. And I think that's more for the psychology side of it, but it is a very important piece in how to deal with some of these ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
Julia,
oh, sorry. I was gonna say, Julia put in the chat just to follow up, or they're like that with everyone, which I've heard that as an excuse before too. Go ahead, WC.
I was going to say, a couple of years ago, I pulled an article aside from Technical Communication. I did not read the whole thing. It was basically the first couple pages, but it seemed like it would be enough information that perhaps we should have a panel discussion on it sometime. But my sense of it was that it was written by a young woman who either had been a college professor or had returned to being a college professor after working in industry. And her assessment was that technical communicators were undervalued. And this was from the perspective primarily of a woman who felt like she was also discriminated against. So it seems to me that as I read it, I was getting a strong dose of female viewpoint that I discounted because I think she had an agenda in my mind. And yet I'm not denying that this is probably something real and probably something that certainly you who have just or are graduating from UCF have probably never had a class on. So how do you protect yourself from being undervalued? And then examining the conclusions of that article. It relates to what we're talking about here, but it also is a persistent problem. Lockheed Martin's solution was hire attractive women to work with the grouchy engineers. And so I felt a form of reverse discrimination because it was like saying, look, our job gets easier if they don't look like you. If they look like her, we do better because they're happy. So,
and now you're like, but in retrospect.
So and it's like as a supervisor, these are the ones that I had to take time to go play tennis and or they stupid things like giving blood just as we entered into a proposal crunch where we were going to be there for the next 20 hours 2 days in a row, and clearly couldn't hold up to it. This kind of thing. There's what I'm saying is not for tonight, but for later. That article has the potential to be a useful look at the world ahead for those who are not fully attached to the professional world yet.
I want to give a follow-up positive because I realize we talked about sexual harassment a bit. I, for 4 years, worked on a team of all female writers, which I was very lucky to have that opportunity to do. I've also worked with men, and Dan Voss was my mentor, who was a man, so I do not want to discount the value of men in any way. But that was at that time in my career, especially coming into that team, very, very rewarding for me to be supported by women who were, more advanced in the profession than I was, and were able to teach me and shelter me in some ways from things that I might have experienced in a different team dynamic. So I was lucky that it was also just a great group of people. It was on the flip side, I've had issues with other women I've worked with, because sometimes it depends on what company you're with. There can be some innate additional competition that does come up. Jessica's nodding a lot.
Yeah, I had an interesting introduction to work experience because I mentioned I did hardware documentation. I pretty much worked with all men.
Mm-hmm.
My manager was female, but she was in half the country away. So I was pretty much in a pit with men for years. And unfortunately, I was older by that point. I wasn't a hot young thing by any stretch of the imagination. So I think I was sort of protected, but it was interesting. And it, you do have to be like, oh, I guess that's just allowed. And we all go with it. And then I switched to a different company, which was a lot of women in management.
Mm-hmm.
It was a healthcare, which tends to have a lot more nursing input and not nursing. I work with a lot of nurses, but there are a lot of female doctors. I mean, it was very much a female environment, and it was very interesting to see. I was nodding a lot because I thought, wow, there are a whole different set of problems here. I felt sort of, much more supported, but I thought, wow. And I'm not talking about anything catty. I'm saying like, maybe we think a little bit too much. Maybe we're overanalyzing too much, where when I was working with all men, they would just tend to, maybe not in the most PC way, and you just got to be shocked, but they did cut through a lot of some of the negotiate. I don't know what that was. Maybe it was just that company or that culture, but I did see the contrast. And so I did say, oh, it is a mix of people. It isn't always, it isn't always just working with women, although I did like it initially. And then I had to see, oh, I was unprepared for these other problems because I was so used to fending off, male engineers all the time. And I didn't recognize it. And I kind of walked in and said, oh, wait, there's other things I have to think about here.
Well, and maybe that's something that I think almost everyone, when they start like their first job or their second job, or if you move to a big corporate job or something with a larger team, getting a feel for the team dynamic and where you fit in it is more of an art than a science. Like people can give you advice, but it's so specific. just how to fit in but not lose yourself in the group is definitely something that you learn through experience. And people can definitely give you advice. I'd say don't worry so much. That's the advice people always tell me as an anxious person. You don't need to worry so much. I'm like, I like to worry about things. But you're going to make mistakes and, step on somebody's toes or rub someone the wrong way or something like that. And, a lot of it's just about learning to interact with people so that you can smooth things over. What things are, just misunderstandings, I think, is something that you learn over time, because especially when you're new, a lot of things can seem huge and later you're like, oh, that wasn't a real conflict. That was nothing. We worked through it. We're professionals. So yeah, it's definitely interesting once you get out in the workforce. I did want to just check in I know we're a little bit past 8. I think we're good to go a little bit longer, but were there any other questions or follow-up in the chat? I appreciate you guys giving some feedback. But if you have anything, we're happy to talk about that. In a way, I'm like happy that there's not a lot of problems. I would feel like I'd have a lot to come forward
I'm
with.
just gonna follow up on what you said, Bethany.
Sure.
Really quick. Over time, you also learn what your triggers are. I find that I have it's weird. I have the most trouble with people who are passive aggressive or manipulative in a certain way, or there's like an agenda and I can feel it. I grew up with some people like that. And so I'm susceptible to that more than I would be to other types of issues. It's weird. I could handle maybe male engineers who are being very aggressive. And I was like, you think that would bother me more? And it kind of did, but I could always tell a joke and we could laugh about something. Whereas that type of, just, I don't know how to describe it because it's so foreign to me.
More subtle, indirect.
And just sort of like you can feel the agendas there and you feel like you're being litigated just when you're having a conversation. You don't know why. I found some people walk right by that and it doesn't bother them at all. And that's something you learn over time too. So there's just something to know yourself. And sometimes like you said, it's only through experience. And then once you see it, you can go, okay, I have to come up with a different way of dealing with this person. This is something that triggers me. It may not be as big of a deal as I think it is. It's just something that's my issue. And I sort of learned to look at myself first. And then now that I have the perspective, I can be more objective after I look at myself first and say, is this a trigger or is this really over the line? And sometimes it really just is over the line. And I say, no, I'm going to look at myself. But sometimes it is just me making, bringing past traumas forward. And so it's good to know yourself in that way. And that's one of the things you learn over time is, oh, this is something that really bothers me and doesn't bother anybody else. Whereas, this is something that bothers everyone. And that's the art of it. That's the art of knowing yourself and knowing how to read the room.
Yeah, I might have mentioned this on some meetings before. I've been told this is unconventional, but when I start a job, I keep notes on my coworkers. I don't need them so much now,
creepy.
5 years in. Well, especially sometimes you start a new job and you might meet 100 people in your first, 3 months. And, just notes on who they are, who they work for, maybe something about if there's any traits that you need to be aware of, like so and so is very difficult, or they could be a little terse. Yes, I have been told it's creepy. I stand by it as a useful tool for me to help keep track of people, and to help make notes on who were people I could go to for advice or specific information, things that often it's hard to learn coming in. When you first start a job, sometimes you'll need to update a document or something like that, and you might get a really vague directive as to who to go to. Maybe you're lucky and you have an assigned person, or it might be, I'm sure someone in implementations can help you. You go, great, thinking, what is implementation? Where do I find it? And, sometimes it helps to ask, but often, it just helps to I do a lot of note taking in general. It's one of my major TechCom pieces of advice is to take notes.
Why am I picturing future child of Bethany in preschool making notes on preschool classmates?
Or I was going to say on her parents, when your child pulls out the notepad and be like, so mom. And part of you will be thinking, I raised them right. And the other part will be like, damn it.
I will say my mom brings up that one of her favorite archival items from my childhood is a black paper notebook, because it was the 90s and it was very cool, that I wrote on in gel pen. which dates, I think, me to exactly the year I was born based on that trend, where I carefully cataloged my dolls and their names and their likes and dislikes at about, I think it was in third grade. And that seemed like a very rational thing to do. And in retrospect, is absurdly strange. No one asked me to do that. And shows that's why I am in the place I am today. I think
that shows that your documentation is the right thing for you to be involved with.
Right.
In my case, I would stand before seatbelts in the back seat of our 1955 Chevrolet, looking over the front seat. And every time the odometer changed, I would write down the number. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, I mean, just like, documentation, creating a record. I mean, I'm all about that.
Well, Bethany, I'll back you up as to why I think that's a good practice from a TechCom perspective, because this is unique to the TechCom job. You are processing so much information, and the more complex the information is, I have definitely found myself just being, I guess I can have that objectivity where all I care about is the information. I don't really, the personality is second to me. It's just literally, I have to write this thing. I have to get a job done. I want to know how it works. And sometimes I've been oblivious to how I'm coming off. I'm coming off more aggressive than I think I am. Right. But it's just, I'm so eager to learn the actual information that I definitely have had that experience in meetings where I look around, I'm like, what just happened? What did I do? Oh, wow, there's a whole thing going on here. And I just ran into the room with my questions when they just had a fight and I didn't pay any attention to that. And so I think keeping those notes, I was like, I think I need to make a file, because I think that's useful, that when you're trying to accommodate so much information, because think about it, you're trying to learn your product, and then you're trying to learn whatever tool it is you're working in. And I just went through this with someone new at the company when I realized I had to say, I'm sorry, if I sound like I'm speaking really fast, I'm thinking of 5 different things right now based on what you just said. And that can get you into weird personal situations because you just forget. You're just so busy trying to learn everything and know and get everything you need quickly that you forget that there's there might be an interpersonal interaction you're really messing up, walked into. And so that's actually a pretty good idea.
Oh yeah, I do it for important things. I write down has kids, loves dogs, or or things like if someone's had a death in the family, I got to make sure I write that down so I don't come roaring in with where are your documentation updates? Oh, you were out for a week because your father passed away. I need to have a note on that so I don't accidentally get too focused. So I totally understand. Do not take notes on your coworkers if you are not comfortable, and do not share them. They're just for you. I don't write down lots and lots of personal details. I don't catalog their children and their birthdays. I just make some notes to help keep track.
It's a good idea to remember, there's all different kinds of developers. It's easy to remember the person who's going to take offense at certain things that you just don't care about, and you really offended them and you just forget because you're just asking information, or the person that you're going to go to ask a very simple question and will talk for half an hour about something that they think is related to what you just asked, but really isn't. And without cutting them off 5 times, you can't get your answer. So you'll forget that. And you're like, oh, like I said, you'll be in the middle of the conversation going, oh God, this is the person you never asked the question that way. And so having that file can really help you. I think I was like, yeah, I should keep one of those and remind myself not to walk in, because you go in and you're like, oh my God, this is the 10th time I've done the same thing with this person. I can't believe I didn't remember not to do that. So it's helpful.
Yeah, I will say some of this also relates to one of my general foundational beliefs about how I interact with technology, for better or for worse. There are upsides and downsides. Do not feel like you have to adopt this philosophy. The human brain is an incredible machine. It does so many things so well all the time. And I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And I've accepted that there are things it's better for me to externalize from my brain. So that's why I do a lot of note taking, because that frees me up to not have to remember 1,000 things sometimes if I can refer to my notes. And that's just a personal thing that works for me. That's why I rely heavily on my calendar, to tell me where I'm going to be, because I'm not good at perspective memory about what's happening tomorrow if I don't have a record to refer to it. And maybe that's partly a generational thing, but I've decided to rely on technology to some extent. And I'll say, currently as a pregnant person, it is very useful to have a second brain that's not in my brain that I can refer to, which is notes and documents. I see WC's having an aside.
Yeah, no,
No worries.
My mother was trying to contact her caregiver, so.
Oh, well, if you need a minute. So yeah, that's why I always say lots of advice about note taking, because that is one of my foundational philosophies. I've been doing it my entire career. I've never regretted taking the time to take notes. And the times I have not, I often have regretted, or incomplete notes where it'll have some note about, we had this meeting, we talked about the problem, we talked about potential solutions, and I didn't identify which one we chose. And I'm like, I wish I'd taken a better note then. So that's just one of my things. Those notes are for me, by the way. As I talked about earlier in my career, I don't like taking notes for other people. It's a great skill, but it's very different from documenting for yourself. And now I have to document every single thing I do in my job because I will plan to be on maternity leave next year. And I do a lot of things. So thank goodness I have my notes to start building all my procedure docs from. So that's the other upside. I guess that kind of got into my problem of how to not seem like a serial killer to your coworkers. Never let them see the notes you keep on them.
I was going to say, you might want to keep those note files on your personal
Very
laptop.
private. Yeah. We're at 8:21. Our plan was to go to 8:30. I did want to allow time if there were any last questions or feedback from our attendees. Thank you for being so responsive in the chat all along. So otherwise, I guess WC, Jessica, any last things you wanted to share in our final minutes?
Well, I for some reason, for a lack of, I won't say a lack, but for having a small number of questions, we seem to have a very ongoing conversation, well animated. So I've enjoyed being part of this tonight. It hopefully has had some value as you look ahead in your career. Speaking to the group now, as each of you look ahead to your career, be aware that it's more than just what you learned at UCF. There are skills you need to develop. There's initiative that you had to self-develop that will allow you to sustain a career, as falling behind is not an option. And I hope that the three of us have provided some glimpses into some of the obstacles you've got to find cheerful ways around, and some of the persistence and self-analysis you need to go to that make you continue to be effective in your career.
If I could follow up on that, WC, something I really should have been mentioning all along. Many of the times I have faced difficulties at work, I have brought them to people in STC that I know and trust, who I do not work with, who I can ask for candid advice, who will, give me the benefit of their experience, their knowledge of me, and their ambivalence about my company, to help, steer me forward.
That's true.
Because when you're in a job, you're in the job. So that's something that's been helpful. Caitlin said no questions, but this has been really helpful and pleasant to listen to. We should make this a podcast. That would do great. It's just Jessica, WC, and I sitting around and chatting about our work stories.
Well,
for your listening pleasure.
Yeah, I will pick up on what you just said, because I always used to say, going back, we're going to go all the way 360 back to the interview questions. One of the things I do try to drop into an interview, because it's true, is the benefit of hiring someone who's a senior person like me with as much experience is that I made all my mistakes at other companies, which is always kind of funny and kind of an aside to say, look, I already learned how to do the things wrong somewhere else. You won't have to waste time with me because I've learned that. But I can add to that. And I think this is great because my involvement here, listening to you all, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really going to learn. I'm learning from your experience and your mistakes, not just mine, which sort of amplifies the whole process. And that is very helpful.
That's what makes hiring so hard, particularly the first time. That's where that 5-year experience thing comes from, because the companies we work for now don't have any method to train you. You're going to be doing documentation that represents their product to the public, and they need to have the assurance that you're not going to wreck the ship. So somebody who has made the mistakes, who has proven themselves in the craft, who has something to contribute on day one, it has to be kind of like a unicorn. But yeah, unfortunately, that's what small business needs.
And as a new person coming in, you can turn that on its head and say, I didn't had a job before, you can teach me how to do it right. Assuming, of course, that they have time to train you.
Right. The I have no bad habits argument,
true.
which is
But
very solid.
Then you can also say, but I'm very active in the STC where I've learned from other people. That was the point I was trying to make.
Right. I've accepted the wisdom of my elders and learned from their mistakes, and I will not be imitating the mistakes they have made.
Well, it is a good point, because you know, in Julia's case, she's coming into a new position, and while it may seem like on her resume there's a very small amount of experience yet, she comes with a mentorship team. Her old council of wizened warriors that benefit her in the workplace if she's able to use and act on our advice.
Yeah. I'll say along and along. There's never been a moment I've regretted being an STC. It's been really helpful, not just from the advice piece, but also just for having a community of people. I know WC mentioned very early on, not to be a whiner on the job, not to whine, but, and I would agree. I say to my husband all the time, I'm like, you have no idea how nice I am at work. I am so nice to everyone all the time because I'm being a professional. But it's nice to be able to talk to people you don't work with who are like-minded people in the field about the obstacles you do face. It's okay to vent about your problems or to seek advice. It's just, not to do it to the people who are causing your problems directly.
I'm having a memory and a flashback that I just cannot stop laughing about it, because my introduction to the working world and TechCom was not as pleasant. And I do, in terms of mentorship, I'll never forget, I was sitting around with, I think was it the board of the STC, or it was one of those meetings, and someone was saying, oh my God, I've been dealing with publishing tools for 20 years. I have to get out of this before it kills me.
Oh no.
And then like the next person said, oh my God, I know, that's why. And I was like, this is not really the round of mentors that I was hoping for with only having 1 year of experience. But
Yeah.
I thought, okay, well, I need to not wind up like that. But
End up bitter.
I never forgot that. It was such an interesting, it was sort of like the Through the Mirror Darkly of the mentor program we have here.
Exactly, where you're like, oh, these are not the mentors I seek. I would like
Exactly.
people who have hope for the future.
I'll be as active a member next year. I could have been another group too, but I never forgot the conversation. And I just thought, these were people I was looking to who are more senior that I was hoping to be mentored by, and I was not mentored by any of them.
Well, glad you're here at STC.
Exactly, and that's a good thing. That was a positive thing.
We do have a question from Caitlin. How often on a weekly basis would you say you were having to bite your tongue on a sarcastic response? Oh. I want to say first, I work with a great team. I love my team. I genuinely do. And it's one of the reasons I've stayed with the company I'm with for 5 years, because I have really great coworkers who I support, and we can be very honest with each other and open. For people outside of my team, especially for people who maybe don't understand what we do, maybe 3 or 4 times a day, usually by email, which is great because then I don't put that in the email. I pause and then I put my very nice response with a thanks and an exclamation point at the end, which one of my coworkers picked up on sometimes means I'm annoyed, but other people don't realize that, where I'm like, thanks. So it's not really sarcastic. But that'd probably be it. It's typically in the case of someone assuming that our work is easy and quick and that we're always waiting and available to do it. That's what I feel very sarcastic. They're like, oh, yeah, you could put together a doc for that. Is tomorrow? Tomorrow sounds good. We would have liked to have had it today. I'm like, but you're just telling us about it today. I don't say that. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. When you said 3 to 4 times a day, that really make me laugh. I do work on a team with a lot of people who are sarcastic. So they have more, they more than I, but yeah, that I think that something that I do have to control is that impulse to say, what if you out of your mind? Which is not always, and to keep it off my face. Sometimes it's better to not be on video because I'm thinking, you did hear what just came out of your mouth, right? So I've learned to pause.
All right. I'll share one more brief story that eventually is going to continue to reveal what a weird person I am for writing everything down. I have a list of phrases that I use that buy me time when I am annoyed with something, especially in an actual conference call where someone has asked something ridiculous or that seeming to me is rude, for me to then pivot to something more productive. They include things like, I appreciate you asking that question. Let me give it some thought, or I will have to think about this later, or let me do some more research on that, or I need more detail. Can you elaborate? They're all written down because sometimes I just need something to refer to so that I don't go, no, instinctively, because you have to work with people. And sometimes you're being given unreasonable deadlines and you just have to go back in and negotiate them.
Yeah, just remember that everything is easy for the person that doesn't have to do it.
Yes.
And the engineers, in my case, that we work with, it's perfectly logical to them that they need to take most of the time, and we don't need very much because, you know, whatever it is we do, they don't understand. And so having it by tomorrow morning is easy. I mean, we have nothing demonstrable that shows why it should take so long. Never mind all the interlacing of text and graphics and the influencing we need to do to make sure that those pieces are available at the same time, the quality checks, the organization that we represent. I think probably, if anything is underappreciated, it's the amount of organization and protection that we put into preserving the work that we do. For example, you know, not tangent, I guess, large proposal. And until the revision feature showed up in Word, we were probably pretty much screwed because we were using a network proposal system where each engineer would contribute their section. And then I would edit. And I finally got in the habit of saving a text version of the entire proposal file, because inevitably, when we ask for revisions, the idiot is not revising in the system. He has his copy on the hard drive, the one that I edited yesterday, and he makes 2 word changes and sends that in again. So if all these guys do it, I'm going to lose my work every single day and never have any idea of what actually has been updated. Because I was able to keep a full text file, I could always run a match and then throw his stuff out of the system, make the 2 word change, and keep going. But yeah, if that hadn't happened, 30 years ago, you can imagine the kind of chaos that our large proposals would have had, because we keep undoing our work to each other. Engineer, it was easy.
That is stock.
In addition to, you know, making it, you know, my other favorite phrase for those of you who have difficult personalities is, you don't realize how hard it is to make you guys look good. But yeah, if not for those things, the job gets impossible. Just all I can say is, there's a final comment. Keep your humor and find a way.
Yeah, being able to tell a good joke goes a long way with a team.
Yeah, I'll say you get inside jokes with your team. Whenever we have one of those requests where someone expects magical documentation work to happen overnight, we refer to it as an elves in the shoemaker sort of situation, referencing the old fairy tale about a cobbler who is able to make shoes every night because elves come during the night, and after he's prepared all the material, make the shoes for him. And the next morning there are beautifully made shoes. And that is, we think, sometimes the perception of documentation. We provided shoe materials, shoes instantaneously. So yeah, you'd have to find the humor in things and learn. So I think we are just past our time. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, WC and Jessica, for being our panelists. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your feedback in the chat. We're glad to have you here. It was nice having a small crowd, though, and I think we had a good conversation. And hopefully some people will get to enjoy the recording as well. So I hope we will see you guys next month, October 21st.
Sounds good. I'll be there.
All right.
Yeah, this was really enjoyable, and I've learned a lot from the both of you, as I always do. But it's
Me too. I learned some things from WC I hadn't heard before, and I've known him for years. So thank you both. Okay, let's say thanks. Bye. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.